Good morning. The December 15th, 2002 special board meeting is now in order. Paul, roll call, please.
Mr. Souza?
Here.
Ms. Wright?
Here.
Mr. Trent?
Here.
Ms. Jenkins?
Here.
Ms. Campbell?
Here.
Please stand for the pledge of allegiance. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, everybody. Today we'll interview Mark Rendell at 9:30, James Larson at 10:30, and Robert Schiller at 11:30. First thing we're going to do is we're going to discuss the format of the questions. There was a article in one of the papers that made some accusations against one of the candidates, but if you read this, it's an entire auditor general that clears the individual of any of those allegations. So just want to let you guys know if there's any questions to it. You guys can review it. So we all have a couple of questions. Do you guys want to start by throwing out a couple that you may want, and then we can formulate it? I mean, we've got pretty much an hour for each one, so doesn't mean we have to put 20 questions down, and if we don't get to all the questions, it's not a big deal. But I'm open for discussion on which ones you would like to hear.
Board, I emailed you. Tammy's made a copy because as I was looking through the questions, these were for the last time that the board hired a permanent superintendent. I think a lot of these questions are more intended for a permanent superintendent. So I did a little research on more questions that were more specific to interim, and Tammy's made a copy. They're not all just interim, because some of them are like, management style and previous teams, whatever, but I think some of these were more specific. So I wondered if because we have to, we don't know how long people will talk. We talked the other day about having an opening and a closing. Do we each want to ask 2 questions in the middle? So that would be 10 total.
Can I butt in for a second?
Yeah.
So Mr. Gibbs had sent a suggestion yesterday that I think is the easiest thing to do if you guys are willing to do it. An opening for 5 minutes, a closing for 5 minutes to each candidate, and then each board member gets 10 minutes question and answer. So if one of your questions takes an 8-minute response, then you only get 1 question. Okay. But put the timer on the clock. That way we don't go over, because if we start messing around and people don't get to ask questions, it's going to get kind of confusing and not fair to each candidate. And plus we have a crunch timeline here. But I think that, to me, makes the most sense.
We can do that, and then what we can do is reverse the order. So the first person goes with one person second, you know what I mean? Okay. We can reverse the order, and I'll always go last. So, you know what I mean? So to give that window in case, and then if you guys, the only question in that, the 5 minutes opener, the 5-minute response is one thing, but the other thing is that I would say, in the event that you have a question to something they said while the other board member's presenting their questions, just write it down and ask it when it's your time. That way you don't ask a question that takes up the other board member's time. So if you guys are okay with that, then that's okay with me.
And also consider, we do have one-on-ones too. So if it's like a detailed follow-up, it's probably more appropriate for a one-on-one.
Right.
That's what I was just going to ask, excuse me, is if we're going to operate off of these lists. I have other questions I'd like to ask, but I was saving this kind of more for a one-on-one basis versus, these are good starting points though, so I like. And
you don't have to take up your full 10 minutes. Like, you know what I mean? You can...
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is if, I know I understand the clock thing, but it kind of sounds like we've already set up like the Inquisition here.
I know
so we can, not informal, but just relax it just a little bit. The only thing about the 10 minutes per board member is if our questions, I think, it doesn't take 10 minutes to ask my questions or whatever. But I think we probably do need to share which ones we want to ask, either off these or up, so that we're not asking, because if you have your list and I was going to ask almost identical question, we can kind of have a plan, because whatever we do, we need to ask the same ones of each candidate. When just tossing this out as a different format rather than 10 minutes per board member, that's the reason why I said 2 questions per board member or 3 or however you want to do, because that way we make sure that every candidate answers the same questions. If some have shorter answers, they get to answer more questions.
You can litigate yourself into just have a couple of questions. You got 10 minutes, go through them, make sure you ask the same questions. If you don't get to them, you don't get to them.
And again, with this list you made that we have just cross off the questions that are
I'm
you
just,
know, vaguely resemble yours.
Ms. Jenkins said that she made hers already.
Right,
I
and
made
she's
mine.
probably got
I'm
some
asking
that are
one
very close to these, and I'll just mark them off. And,
I'm only asking one question.
right,
and I'm gonna
I don't
follow.
care who asks questions, we're probably all going to ask very similar,
Yep.
very similar questions.
Yeah, and I know you already kind of said this, but I just want to reiterate. It's going to be impossible for every candidate to have the exact same question in case some of them answer too long, but if we can
Right.
try to intend on asking the same question of every candidate
Yep.
Okay, so we need to nail down the questions that we want to ask.
in this setting. I mean,
Okay.
one-on-one is different,
Okay.
obviously.
Fair enough.
From the list that Tammy sent us, the ones that, there are a couple in just the general information that are, to me, would be very helpful. The first one, top 5, and, we can
Yeah.
make it 3.
I have
Top
3.
facing Brevard Public Schools, timeline, and again, just remembering it's interim, and then what is one area you can make the greatest impact? How would you initiate that change? And then really, to me, the best questions for our situation are on the back, the board, staff, and community relations, because I think that's where we're going to really need somebody to express how they can help us build that back up.
You guys all have your questions that you guys think you're going to ask?
Yeah, do we need to go ahead and highlight what those are now so we're not duplicating it?
Yeah, that's what
Okay.
I think. You're good, Campbell?
Yeah, I mean,
So,
I think Ms. Jenkins had said that did you make your own
Yeah, so-
outside of the box here? Which is fine. We just need to know which ones you may have already chosen so that we don't ask the same question.
no, I wrote my own questions, but
But you're going to ask the same questions.
I'm going to
all-
ask the same questions to everybody, but I hear what you're saying, Ms. Campbell, but also I just want people to understand where I'm coming from as well. I think more than just the situation, I think it's important also to somewhat think long-term, right? Because it's not necessarily the case that these interims don't want to be the full-time superintendent either. So, yeah.
I would say, what I would say to that, Ms. Jenkins, is we'll have a superintendent search with questions then too. And I think that if they want to try to stay long-term, that's great, but right now this one's for the interim, so
I hear you.
you can ask any question you want. I
But
mean,
yeah.
that's fine.
Yes. But no, I'm asking the same question to every single candidate.
Okay, so Ms. Jenkins, do you have not chosen any from either of the lists that we received, right?
I would argue 2 of my questions that I developed kind of came from this, but I tweaked it so that it made a little more sense to now.
Can you give us which one of those came from there so that they don't ask the same?
They didn't come from here.
But you
It
tweaked it.
inspired it.
You
Yeah.
tweaked it, so if you can just cut those off the sections.
I couldn't tell you which one it is. So, yeah, I don't mind. Sure. So 2 of them, and again, I don't even know, it's going to depend on the timing and the answers of the candidate and who goes before me. So I have a list of questions here. I'm not going to be able to use them all. So the 2 that I pulled from this and just kind of developed myself were, please explain your experience with diversity, equity, inclusion, and what you've done in your current role and or what you do in this one to ensure all students are successful, focusing on the mission, strategy, and academics for Brevard Public Schools. And then the other one is, were you evaluated in your previous role as blank, because everyone has a different resume? If so, what were the results of this evaluation? What was an area identified as an opportunity for professional growth, and how did you work towards that improvement? So focusing on self-reflection and accountability of the candidate.
So diversity and what have you done to overcome adversity too? All right. Ms. Campbell?
Come back to me.
Okay. Ms. Wright?
I would like the candidate to identify the top 3 critical issues that they see that BPS is currently facing, and how they intend to attack those issues. And then I would also, I really like the idea of them disclosing a project that failed and why it failed and how they would improve that. I think that shows that they're able to identify something that maybe is improvement.
That first question, again, I might just let you ask my question. I know the sheet, but I want to work with her through it.
Yeah, what are the top 3 critical issues facing BPS, and what will you do to address them?
You can add, how does your experience
Okay.
allow you to do that too?
All right.
Then that takes care of mine, and I don't have to do that one. All right.
Okay.
Ms. Campbell, are you ready, or do you want me to go to Jean?
Go, Jean.
Okay.
Oh, they're very good. Some that are not on here, just, thoughts on policy review. in your previous roles or current roles,
Okay.
and what experience have you had in that process? And specifically too, that may not be on here, we're losing two very important positions in cabinet members, like HR, for example, and where's your experience on that? And that's something that's going to have to be addressed. That's more of a now question. I mean, otherwise, I love when somebody has to describe their management style. And
That is probably one of the most important.
yeah,
I agree with you. So you say you have management style as your third?
yes.
All right. So just so you guys know, what I'm doing is I think just to help everybody out, in the event that your 10 minutes maxes, I'll try to ask the questions that you had that maybe you didn't get to. That's all. Okay? So like if Gene wanted to ask, I really like the management one, right? So once we get down to it, it's just when that happens, that will be my questions for the next two. That's all. All right? All right, Ms. Campbell, what do you got?
Did I give them 3?
I think from the list I typed up, I just want to really ask those interim questions because we do need, so number 11, what would a productive, successful, intentional interim, I don't know why I put that intentional, that was in the question, I adapted it from something else. Interim process look like for our district?
Okay.
And then the other one would be from the board staff community relationships one over here. There's 2. Those are the same. That's why I like them both, because they were the same question. The last one, talking about building trust relationships with all the stakeholders. So I think I will do those 2. Where are you? It was the last one on, this. Okay. So the last one on the page that I gave you guys, and then the last one on board staff community relationships.
So kind of what I have is diversity from Ms. Jenkins, evaluate like your situation when you did something that you had to grow from, right? Policy review, cabinet member placement, and how their management style is from Trent. Then I had the question that you had. Did you want to add any more questions that you were going to ask in that realm?
Not necessarily in that realm, but if we're all going to take 3, I would love to incorporate the finance aspect of it. It's the second question that's in there. What's your vision for financial reporting, transparency, and maintaining the public trust regarding the financial affairs of DPS? I would like to address that one.
Okay. All right. And then we have
I honestly don't know how we can have interviews if we don't ask them their thoughts on their current state of education.
Right.
Someone needs to ask that question.
That can be, or I guess if we're going to take 3. So are we going to go rather than,
I'll ask that
we've had
one.
the suggestion of 10 minutes each, or are we going to go like
Yeah, I think I like the idea of like rotating it a little
down the line one?
You do?
I do. I mean, just so that it's not, it breaks up the questions a little bit to the interviewer too.
So the only reason I'm saying this is not, I just think, let's be real, we haven't had one meeting that's been on time, and we're really, really crunched for time. If your questions are done, like, you can just move on, right? We have an hour, so, if I'm done in 8 minutes, it doesn't mean someone can't take 12, And it's not like solid, no one's gonna turn your mic off, but in order to just like kind of keep us focused on the time frame we have, I think it's really important for us to do that.
Okay.
Sounds good. All right. So what we have is
I'll have a
5
third
minutes.
in case my 10 minutes is up. So we're picking 3. Do I need a third one?
no, just get to it when you get to it.
Okay, thank you.
So what I was going to do is I like what Ms. Jenkins was saying. For the first round, to be honest with you, I just kind of went left from this way over. So the first one, Trent will start, Wright will go, then Campbell, then Jenkins, then if anything needs to be wrapped up. Then the second one will be Wright, Campbell, Jenkins, Trent, and then Campbell, Jenkins, Trent, Wright, if that makes any sense, in order. That way each one of you guys gets the beginning, sort of, you know what I mean?
Okay.
That way it's some sort of order before we get started.
Yeah,
And
gotcha.
then I'll follow all of them with whatever anybody didn't ask that you may want me to ask. So, all right? All right, we don't have the official interview that starts until 9:30, so if there's any questions, we can kind of stop for a minute and get prepared and then come back. What do you guys think? Sound good?
I think we need to address the bathroom break that everyone's saying.
Right, yeah, I was
We
gonna
did
say,
not allocate a
you
bathroom break.
can always start, and then that builds in a little bit of a padding for later on. If we
Yeah.
take the hour, you've got 10 minutes before
We're going to
10:30
need one at some
starts.
Listen, if you,
That coffee's gonna start hitting
if you
people.
gotta go to the
Yeah.
bathroom, you can go to the
It's
bathroom while
not
we're
built in the
working.
schedule. I don't want to miss any of it,
Yeah.
though.
All right.
Actually,
How about you guys?
can we take a 5-minute right now? and
Yeah,
go?
well, that's what I was gonna do, is I was gonna stop, let everybody go, and then if you guys, I'll check in every hour. And then if you
Okay.
guys are ready,
He's going to look right at me. I can feel it. Like it's gonna be-
sounds good.
I think we can delay by 5 minutes in between every person. I mean, I think
Right.
that's reasonable.
But
That's
if,
it, I'll
if
just
Dr.
check,
Rendell's
I'll
ready,
check,
can
I'll
we start
check
at
at the
like
hour,
1:20?
and then we'll go through it, all right?
You want
Everybody?
to start a little bit early after we have our quick break?
No, I'd like to start on time.
Right at 9:30?
Here we go.
Okay.
It's kind of a dual purpose.
Welcome back, everybody. Just to take a second and say thank you to Mr. Rendell for applying for the interim superintendent position. We have a series of questions that we have for each one of our members. Just so the public understands, we've come up with a series of questions that each one of us are going to ask, and the order is just going to kind of move down and the first person that goes will become the last person for the next one. So with that, we're going to have a 5-minute introduction. We're going to ask questions for about 50 minutes, and then we're going to have a 5-minute close. Some of us might take shorter, and we'll go from there. So with that, Mr. Rendell, thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, board. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to interview for this position. The position of interim superintendent in Brevard is critical for the school district at this time. I want to thank you as an employee for taking the time to do this in a thorough process, and you guys are definitely trying to do the right thing by students, the parents, the community, by taking your time and going through a process. I appreciate that. I want to give you a little bit of my background. Some of you might know that I'm the principal at Cocoa Beach, but that might be all that you know. I've been in the district a long time, but you guys may not know me, so I'm going to give you a little personal stories and background so you know about me, the person. So I decided to be an educator when I was in high school. I had some really impactful teachers and coaches. I said, you know what, that's what I want to do when I grow up. So I went to college, did the things you got to do to become a teacher. And when I was teaching, I was working for some really impactful, inspiring principals. Like I didn't plan on being a principal, but these people made a big impact on me. I saw what they were doing in the school, impacting student achievement, helping us. I said, so you know what, when I grow up, I want to be a principal. And then as I rose through the ranks and became a principal, I had the good fortune of working for a couple of really, really good superintendents. And then I said, you know what, maybe when I really grow up, that's what I want to be. And so I did the things you got to do to become a superintendent. All of those roles and all of my time, the goal is to provide the best outcomes for students possible. I went into those roles because I saw people doing that. I didn't go into those roles for titles or money or anything like that. I wanted to make an impact for kids. And so in each of those roles, that's always been the driving focus, making your decisions on what's in the best interest of the kid. A little bit of personal history about my family. My wife Heidi and I moved here in 1993, and we bought our first house in Hammock Trace, about 2 miles east of here. And all of our children have been born in Florida, 3 children, all born here in Brevard County. We helped found Faith Vieira Lutheran Church, a couple miles away as well. Founding members of that church, all of our children have been baptized by Pastor Meyer. He is still a close personal friend and pastor. So Brevard is in our DNA. All of my kids went to school here, didn't all graduate here, but they've all spent time here. This is in my DNA. As a professional, this is where I grew up. Teacher, assistant principal, where I learned about the craft of educational leadership from the people here. Names like Bob Donaldson, Brenda Blackburn, Rich DePatri, Tom McIntyre. Those are the people that I looked up to and tried to be like when I was making my way. So I've been in Brevard off and on several times, consider this my home. Worked in the district when we were kind of in a better place than I feel like we are right now, and I'd like to be a part of helping us get back to that. You don't know me as a superintendent either, so I brought a bunch of artifacts. Like a good teacher, I brought artifacts and primary source documents, and I was going to get into all that, but I think my 5 minutes is probably wrapping up. So if we have time later, in the closing, take you through some of the documents I provided to you, if not maybe in the one-on-one interviews. But very proud of my work as a superintendent in Indian River County. We did a lot of really good things. You were looking at me for a position of superintendent, so if we get a chance to discuss those things, I'd like to share those.
Thank you, Mr. Rendell. And there were some that I was looking at also that I'll ask those questions when it gets to that point. Mr. Trent, you're up first.
First off, I'd like to thank you very much for being here, putting your name in. It's an honor to have you here, sir. So thank you. You may have noticed we've discussed some of our policies already here in the school board. So I'm going to jump specifically to your thoughts on a policy review for school boards. as large as ours possibly, and have you had any experience in that process in reviewing any change in policy?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was a deputy superintendent in St. Lucie County, I oversaw a policy review committee. It was something we had in place in St. Lucie. We reviewed policies every year, annually. Now, most districts rely on Neola or some other organization to give you policy updates that are a result of legislation. But instead, the policy review committee in St. Lucie, it was like a work group or committee. Policy review committee had members of the community, parents, community members, teachers, other staff members, and we were open to reviewing any policy that the policy review committee decided we needed to review. So the policy review committee might say, hey, we need to look at this policy over here about how we handle student choice or transportation or something like that. And if enough people on the policy review committee voted for that, then I, as a deputy superintendent, would take it to the superintendent, and we would engage with the board to see if the board wanted to review those policies. So the idea is that we don't necessarily wait for Neola or wait for the legislature to tell us about policies we need to change. You know, we're a living, breathing organization. We need to respond to the needs and changes. So if we have policies that are in place that are not necessarily working, then we need to go ahead and address those and change them. So, I would want to engage in some kind of, I don't want to have more and more and more committees, but, you need to be able to respond to, feedback that you're getting that some policies aren't working. You need to have a vehicle in place to address that.
Thank you. Yep, that's great. Were we switching?
No,
or?
we're going to go to 10.
No. All right.
I know you were. That's why
All right. So thank you very much on that. So overall, in being the first, I think this is, I think general questions might be better off is briefly, how would you describe your management style?
Yeah, collaborative leadership for sure. I'm definitely not always the smartest person in the room. You want to try and gather as much feedback and input before you make a decision. If you have a team of people that you meet with regularly, then you consult them and you get their opinion before you make any decision. If you have the ability to seek input from the stakeholders, that's what you need to do. All the time, looking for collaborative input before you make a decision. Now, if you are in the position to be the decision maker, you do make the decision, but you gather as much input as possible. You think about it as a sports coach. No head football coach has ever scored the winning touchdown. The idea is that they create the conditions for success. So the idea is you build that team, that successful team around you. You set the conditions for success. So you set some expectations, some standards. You provide people with training. You provide them with the support to meet those standards. You hold them accountable to meeting those standards. But all in all, it's a team effort. Everything is a team effort. When I became the principal at Titusville High, at my opening meeting with the faculty, I compared our work to being on a ship. That oftentimes we do our work like if you're on a cruise ship. Like we all have our own separate rooms, and we come together for mealtime, and maybe for some excursions, but we don't really work together on things. We need to operate more like a Viking ship, where everybody's got their hand on an oar and we're all rowing in the same direction and working together for a common goal. But you can't do it alone. Everything has to be in a team. So collaborative leadership style for sure.
I got time for another one.
You do.
I do.
He ended.
Yep. Yeah.
Started.
All right. I do, and this would be a good one, and I might have not have mentioned it earlier, but I think it's important here. What makes you the ideal candidate for this role?
Yeah, so you're in a unique situation. We are here in Brevard in a unique situation. You're going through a transition. I've already been a superintendent, so the job is not going to be new to me. I've been a superintendent here in Florida. The job is not going to be new to me. I've been a superintendent in Florida in a neighboring district, so the job is not going to be new. The challenges are there. It's an extremely challenging position. They're there, but the job won't be new. If you hire somebody from the outside, they don't have the knowledge, the Florida knowledge, experience. They may have been a superintendent or something like that, but maybe here they don't know the Florida finance rules. They don't know sunshine law. They don't know all the things, with our current situation. If you hire somebody that has been a superintendent, then they're going to have a learning curve. We're not really, my perception is that we're not really in a position for a learning curve. You really need a steady hand on the tiller right now as you transition, as you make some changes and do some things. So, that I've got the experience. Like I put in my cover letter, it's a challenging position. I've met those challenges. So that's why.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Trent, you finished?
I am. Thank you,
All
Dr.
right.
Rendell.
All right, Ms. Wright.
Thank you, Dr. Rendell. We appreciate you coming here and taking the time to interview with us. I have to disclose, you were the principal when I graduated from Titusville High School, so 2 years ago, but
Hope
yeah.
it was a positive experience.
It was a positive experience. You got me through the finish line, so there you go.
All right.
Yeah. So looking at Brevard County, and obviously we have been a hot topic lately, what would you say the 3 most critical issues are that we have right now, and how does your past experience prepare you to be a good fit to fix those issues?
Yeah, so I think the top 3 is there's a fracture right now between the community and the district. That's one. The next one is a staffing shortage all across the board, teachers, support staff, bus drivers, everything. And the other is a sense of disengagement from the student body. So the first one, the fractured relationship. I've been in a couple of situations before where I needed to be the healer when I came in, so to speak. For example, when I went to Morrisville High School in Morrisville, North Carolina, when I left Titusville, there was a real disconnect between the district and this teaching staff. And I just came in, listened to everybody, tried to find some common ground, brought people together, worked on some projects together. And once some projects together, people seem to value each other and stuff like that. So in this situation here, I was dismayed, I think is a good term, when I saw, not just here, in a lot of places across the country, I view our students and our families as our customers. And I saw customers coming to the business, giving input, asking for things to change, and the company didn't listen. I think the idea is that when people come to you with concerns and issues, you need to listen and you need to bring them inside the tent, so to speak. So the community would know that we're listening. The community would have, avenues to provide input, and that we would evident that we're listening. We would provide evidence that we're listening and making changes based on their input. Not always going to give everybody what they want, but the idea is we hear you, we're going to take into consideration what you're saying, and we're going to, look at policies and maybe make some decisions, some changes like that. It's as simple as when a parent comes to complain about something, you sit down with them, you listen, and you figure out if there's a way for you to meet their needs and respond. Our community is the same way. Over the last couple of years, they've brought some concerns to us, and in some cases we maybe not have listened as intently as we should have. Now, I wasn't in these roles making these decisions, so I can't really say for sure whether we did the right thing or not. But the people need to feel like their voice is being valued, limiting time for public speaking and doing things like that. They're the customers. We need to, I don't mean the customer's always right, but we need to be listening. They need to have input. They need to feel valued. They need to feel like their input is being taken into consideration. For the staffing shortages, we just need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to recruit and retain the best, people possible. One of the things in Indian River, in the packet of information you have, is we did some things in the strategic plan to try to make sure we retained as many employees as possible. And that was at the beginning of this start of this teacher migration out of work, and we were able to increase our retention rate. So the idea is you listen to the folks, you find out what is they need, what they value. Most of it was workplace conditions, working conditions. It wasn't necessarily salary. We did raise our average teacher salary higher than any other district in the region, including Brevard at the time. And but we also worked on working conditions to make sure they understand that not just teachers but all the other employees that that they're valued, and that we listen and find ways to give them things that they're asking for. And so I would take a look at, it's in, I think, another document, that what are we doing to recruit? Who's going on the recruiting trips? When I was assistant superintendent in St. Lucie, and then when I became deputy, I kept HR, and I would go on the recruiting trips. So I would go to the college recruiting trips, and there were not other assistant superintendents or deputy superintendents on the recruiting trips. It was your recruiting person, but it seemed to make a big difference to some of the candidates that a district level person was on, they're wooing them, trying to get them to come. So I would take a look at what we're doing in recruiting, take a look at what we're doing in retention, and try to put some things in right away to make sure we stem the flow of anybody leaving, and do what we can to attract and retain. And then the students, It's a big issue. It's something that we need to take a look at and figure out how to solve or resolve. You know, some of our students were out of school, you know, in person for a few years, and some of their social norms may be different. You know, their expectations, what they were, their behavior policies or whatever, when they come back, their expectations. When I was teaching in the classroom, when I was at Satellite High School and in Virginia, one of the first things I'd say to the kids on the first day of school is, this isn't the mall. Like you said, this ain't the mall, but this isn't the mall. This is a learning environment. This is a formal learning environment. There are some norms here, some expectations, some ways that we're going to interact and behave, and some things I'm going to ask of you, and then you're going to ask some things of me. And I think we have a group of students who aren't meeting those norms, those standard norms in the classroom that we expect. And so we need to figure out how we can remedy that. Some of it is raising the expectations and holding them accountable. You know, it is a formal learning environment. It's a formal learning environment. There are some things that can happen in a classroom, and there's some things that can't, that shouldn't. And if those things are happening, they need to be addressed and responded to. You know, I'm not afraid to, you know, enforce the discipline code and everything like that. When I was a dean at Mel High, I had one of my regulars in the dean's office one day, and he says, you know, Mr. Rendell, we have a nickname for you. And I was like, do I want to know what the nickname is? I'm not sure if I want to know what the nickname is. I'm like, all right, Matt, tell me what the nickname is. They call you the book. I was, oh, because I throw the book at you. As a dean, I throw the book at you. He goes, no. You go by the book. If we skip, we get Saturday school. If it's our second time of skipping, he says, you go by the book. You do everything by the book. Everything is standard. When I was a dean at Cocoa, you know, challenging situation. You guys can check with Dr. Sullivan, but I don't know that I had any parent complaints. You know, a year and a half being a dean at Cocoa, any serious parent complaints, because you treat kids with respect, but you hold them accountable to the behavior expectations. And I think, I'm not sure how to do that as a district, but that's something we need to work on.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to skip around a couple. These questions are a little bit all over, so bear with me here. What is your vision for financial reporting and transparency and maintaining the public trust when it comes to our financial affairs with BPS? Yeah,
so publishing a comprehensive annual financial report, the CAFR, I'm not sure if we do that. If we do, I'm not aware, so maybe people need to be aware. Maybe the community needs to be aware that we publish everything. All school district money is plain to see. All the interactions, all the budget, everything is in the sunshine. Everybody can ask for information. So maybe hold some budget workshops where we present the information to the community, you know, to show them this is what the money is going to, this is what the money is being spent on. I think the voters did show, the community did show a lot of trust in BPS, you know, approving the additional property millage. You know, that shows that they do believe that we are good stewards of the money. Now we need to make sure we show them that we're good stewards of the money. You know, I know that we have these oversight committees. How are we sharing their information, their reports? Do we just come to a board meeting and we review it here at the board meeting? Do we take it out to the community? Do we go to Rotary? Do we go to Chamber of Commerce? You know, do we take this information out there and share it with the community? You know, or do we just do it all here in a board meeting? And we feel like, oh, you can watch the board meeting. It's all, you know, but I mean, sometimes we need to take the information to the people. But, you know, school finances in Florida are open book. You know, you can see everything. And maybe the CAFR, we need to, you know, have a whole workshop on the CAFR and show everybody where the money's going, and so they don't, you know, there is a lot of times some education that needs to be done as to, hey, you know, you have a citizen say, oh, I pay my taxes. You know, you don't need any more money. I pay my taxes. And maybe showing them how that money is then divvied up into different buckets. And it can only be spent on certain things. Like a lot of times, you know, capital money can only be spent on capital. Can't use that money for teacher raises or anything like that. So, you know, probably some opportunities for education.
Thank you.
Ms. Wright, you have 45 seconds.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So this one is really quick. Can you tell us about a time that you've implemented a program or you were involved in something that failed and what you learned from that experience?
Yeah, the one that always comes to mind, not that there's a lot, but no, but the one that always comes to mind is at Titusville High School. We were on the block, and I thought it would be a good idea if all 10th graders took English first semester, so they would have all of 10th grade English done before they took the FCAT writes in February. Made sense to me. Have all of English 10 done before you take the writing test. And the teachers told me it wasn't a good idea. And we did it anyway. And our writing scores dropped. So I met with the faculty at the end of the year, when the scores came in, and apologized. Said, I didn't listen to you. You're the experts. You're the practitioners. You're in the room, and you told me this was not a good idea. So we will go back to doing it the way we were doing it before. I will listen in the future and not think I'm smarter than you. And we did, and our writing scores went back up. In fact, they increased higher, I think, the next year than they had in the previous 2 or 3 years. But I did have a faculty member pull me aside months later and say, no one's ever done that. No one's ever stood in front of faculty and apologized and said they were wrong. And they said that's a sign of a good leader or something like that. But that stuck with me all these years, because that's probably almost 20 years ago. But yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Rendell. Now we have Ms. Campbell.
All right, good morning, Dr. Rendell. So I want to start with what I feel like is maybe one of our most important areas that we'll have to address with an interim, and that is board staff community relations. So how would you build and facilitate a collaborative and trusting relationship with and among school and district leaders, families, teachers, support staff, basically, the businesses and the community, all the stakeholders? How are you going to build those relationships? And if you have some examples of where you've done that in the past, would you share those?
Go out and meet them where they are. This is the biggest thing. You go out and meet them where they are. So you go to the Chamber of Commerce meetings, you go to the Rotary meetings, and you provide them information, but you also listen. Like, you need to go and listen. You need to go and maybe do a little presentation, but then have plenty of time for questions and answers and things like that. I would also open up some kind of town hall, regular function, like every Monday night. The superintendent is in the boardroom, and the community is welcome to come and ask questions and whatever. Just open town hall type of meetings. Maybe not do it here at the boardroom. Maybe go around different parts of the county. We're pretty long, pretty stretched out. And people from MIMS might not want to come all the way down here for a meeting, so maybe go to MIMS. But you go out and meet people where they're at, and you ask for their input. You ask for, questions. When we were hybrid, when we had, fall of 2021, we were hybrid, we held a lot of information meetings with our parents on Zoom as a principal and as administrative staff. And at one point, I just had open office hours. Like, Rendell's going to be on Zoom from 8 to 9. And if you have any questions, just get on Zoom and ask them, and I really think that we need to have some kind of open-ended opportunities for communication with the community. But then you need to do something with that information. I think that's the part of it. If people are going to take the time to come and meet with you and talk with you and give you information, we need to do something with that. We need to respond. So even as the interim, I would start setting up some of these open forums, town halls, whatever you want to call them. Office hours, whatever you want to call it, where, we put out there, hey, if you have any questions about our schools and what's going on, Dr. Rendell is going to be here at this time, might have staff with me or whatever, and we do that. We seek input. And when we get the input, we do something with it.
Thank you. So what do you, what would over this time, the interim time is likely to be, 4 or 5 months-ish at least. What would a productive, successful interim period look like for our district?
Yeah, I think there's several things that you would want to see get accomplished in this time. Number one, start working on some of those things that are glaring and need to be worked on, like this fractured community relationship. We can't say, well, we'll wait for the permanent superintendent to come. We need to do the work now. I think another thing would be kind of an assessment of where we are on the strategic plan. One of the things that, I think is that's supposed to be our guiding document. That's supposed to be what we shape all of our decisions on, all of our work on is the strategic plan. Not supposed to be a document that we generate. You guys spent months developing that strategic plan. We spent months developing the strategic plan in Indian River. And it shouldn't be just a document that sits on the shelf. You should be revisiting it all the time. You should be making all of your decisions based on what you've identified as your priorities, what your goals are, and there should be strategies associated with achieving those goals, objectives to meet, measurable, so you can see if you're meeting those objectives. You should be visiting that at all times. So I think one of the first things I do as the interim is take a look at the strategic plan and how we're doing, in the different areas. What are we doing? Are we meeting our performance objectives? If we're not, why not? The work of leading the district we can't wait for the permanent superintendent. The interim needs to get in there and lead. Now, lead at board direction. One of the things I'm not offering you is a 60, 90-day superintendent's entry plan, okay? Because it wouldn't be my plan. It needs to be our plan. The superintendent and the board need to sit down and set some objectives, for the next 4 or 5 months, what we want to have accomplished in the next 4 or 5 months. There are some big positions to fill. I think those positions need to be filled. I think we need to start looking at retirements and things like that. I think that is in a document in the folder. There's some things we need to look long-term about HR to make sure we have people in place. There's a lot of institutional knowledge walking out of the door in the next couple months and the next couple of years probably. So we need to start thinking about how do we replace that institutional knowledge? Where are the next leaders for Brevard coming from? Are they within? Have we trained them? Have we prepared them? If not. But in reality, it's going to be up to the board and the superintendent interim to sit down and set some measurables, some goals for the next 4 or 5 months. Obviously you don't want to leave things undone saying, well, we'll wait for the permanent superintendent to get here. Kids are in school every day. They're supposed to be being taught every day. We need to make sure we're doing everything we can to provide that best educational outcome every day. We really can't wait. There might be some things we say we're going to do this until the permanent superintendent gets here, but I think that's a board superintendent decision, interim superintendent workshop or something like that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'll ask you a short question, and then I've got another one since we've got time. What is your availability? I'm asking that. I know you're here with us, but I'm going to ask that of everybody, so I want to be even. What is your availability?
Yeah, I'm available to start as soon as you need me to. Obviously, I'm in the district, so there's no issue with that. We would need to make a decision about Cocoa Beach, junior, senior, how we're going to handle leadership there, that kind of thing. But, I'm here ready to go.
Thank you. And then I'll just add one in here. What do you believe to be the ideal working relationship with a school board? How do we get there?
Yeah, I think open and honest communication. Obviously, I don't know if you meet with the superintendent on a regular basis, but the better relationships that I've been in with school board members and as a superintendent is honest and open, regular communication. For example, we have a set meeting on every Thursday from 9 to 10 or whatever, or a set meeting every Wednesday from 11 to 1 or something like that. There were some times when a board member would say, I'll just see you at the board meeting. I don't need to meet with you. We don't need to talk about things ahead of time and stuff. And that's not necessarily productive. You need to be able to, talk to board members about issues that are coming up, get their take on things, have them give you feedback, information, input, stuff like that. I think you sit down and you set as a board some goals for the superintendent, some measurable performance goals, and you're always referring to those measurable performance goals as you go through the year. And, that's something we did, and it's something I would look for here. I know Dr. Mullins had that, I believe, and we'd be doing that. But I think the short answer to the question is open, honest communication. And there shouldn't be any surprises at board meetings and stuff like that. You guys should all know, what's on the agenda, and I should know what is coming, that kind of thing.
All right, thank you.
That conclude your questions? Yep. All right. Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Ms. Jenkins.
Thank you. Good morning. Kind of already heard this question. I'll repeat it again for you. It's been a little while.
I knew that was going to happen when she asked that question. I apologize.
Oh, no, I'm not pointing that out as an issue at all. I'm joking. You've heard it already. So were you evaluated in your previous role as a superintendent? And if so, what were the results of that evaluation? What was an area or areas identified as an opportunity for professional growth? And how have you worked towards that improvement?
Yeah, so obviously evaluated annually as a superintendent, served 4 years in Indian River. And so the first couple of years, my evaluations were pretty good, pretty darn good, actually pretty strong. Always opportunities for improvement and things like that. The last evaluation, third year, whatever was the last one I received, there were pretty strong evaluations from some board members and not as strong from some others. Areas to work on that were identified by the ones that didn't score me as high as they had previously was board member communications. Things like, they didn't feel like I was communicating well with them, board member relations, something like that. I've always tried to have regular, honest, open communication with everybody I work with. So I've just tried to work harder at that to make sure that everybody I work with knows, where we are, what we're working on, that I value their input, that I'm going to take into account what they, their advice and their input, and we're going to work on it together and stuff like that. But really, that's the only one I remember as being something that I said, this really, we can work on that, is try to improve that in that area.
I'm going to go off a little bit just because there was a lot said, and I feel like it's important to ask those questions as like a follow-up. So you had given an example that, our school district is kind of like a business and we have customers that we need. And so you had said that there were times where we didn't listen to the change. So my question is, what changes do you feel like were presented that we didn't listen to, and how was that not accomplished? What would you have done differently?
Yeah, I think there were some concerns about different reactions to the COVID crisis, the mask mandate, for example, things like that. And it seemed like we had a good amount of our customer base saying one thing and another sizable amount of our customer base saying another. And it seems like, we basically chose one customer base over the other. We also went against state direction, which I'm a rule follower by the book. And so, when we get direction, I feel like we need to follow that direction. I think that's probably the example that comes to mind.
Okay, and then you also said, sorry about that. You also said, because you've had a history with Brevard Public Schools, you made a reference that we were in a better place then than we are now. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's just a general feeling. We used to, basically compare ourselves to any other district in the state with our student achievement and our hiring rates and everything, and it seems like we're not quite at the top where we used to be. It's just a gut feeling. So I haven't based that on any data or anything like that, but I feel like we just aren't where we used to be, where we were one of the premier districts in the state. And I might be wrong, but it's the feeling that I have.
How much time do I have left? I want to ask a question that doesn't give me.
Yeah, no. Ms. Jenkins, I just wanted, I'll pause it for a second. I think that these are great questions. It's just that according to some of the other stuff, if we can just make sure that we ask the questions, the follow-up questions that we want to ask, some of those we should ask inside of our roundtable. But if we can keep consistency with what we ask each candidate. I hear you, Mr. Susan. I appreciate that you're asking follow-ups, no problem, but according to Gibbs and others, we want to kind of ask the same questions to the same people and then follow up on our own. So just a little reminder, that's all.
Oh, so absolutely, Mr. Susan, but I can ask whatever questions I want to ask, and those are just general statements about the district. I'm not asking deep down nitty-gritty questions and follow-ups to those responses. So thank you very much.
Ms. Jenkins, I just wanted to make sure that you understood that it's not about that. It's just about asking the same questions.
I will be asking the same questions
Thank
to
you.
the candidates. So now to my second one that will be asked to all of the candidates. Please explain your experiences with diversity, equity, and inclusion and what you've done in your current role and or previous roles, and what you would do in this one to ensure all of our students are successful.
Yeah, so you're always looking at data to make sure that every segment of your student population is succeeding. And so the first example I'll share is when I got to Indian River, I wanted to see, how our students were faring in all different areas of academic achievement. And one of the things I noticed is we did not have a lot of participation in advanced coursework by our minority students. And the percentage of our minority students was not represented in the percentage of students taking AP and IB courses. And so I said, why? And so we did a little bit of investigation. We found out there were some barriers in place that we needed to remove to make sure that every student had the opportunity to take an IB class or an AP class. For example, at Vero Beach High, to take an AP class, you had to have, I think, 4 teacher recommendations. You had to write an essay, and your parents had to fill out a form. There was a lot of stuff that really had nothing to do with whether you could be successful in AP or not. So we identified a group of students that showed potential to be successful in AP or IB courses, i.e. they scored 3 or higher on whatever the state assessment was at the time, FSA, I think, or FCAT. And we said, these kids need to be encouraged to take AP and IB courses. And so we met with the families. We actually had meetings at both high schools we identified the families of the students that we thought could be taking AP and IB courses, and showed them why we thought they should be taking AP and IB courses, and made sure they understood that not only were we going to enroll them in the courses, we were then going to support them and make sure that they were successful. And so we had a lot of minority students enroll in AP and IB courses. We actually identified white students that were scoring at the rate that they should be in AP and IB courses, and they weren't in AP IB courses because, again, some of those roadblocks that were in place, some of those things that just didn't seem to have any bearing on whether you could be successful in AP and IB class. So we increased AP and IB enrollment by great numbers. It's on the resume, especially the Black African-American students, Hispanic students, but even white. We even increased the number of white Caucasian students taking AP and IB courses. And our performance on the AP and IB exams did not suffer. One of the things we did after the first year is we checked to see, we put more kids in these AP and IB classes, theoretically not as strong students in those AP and IB classes, and we saw a negligible or no drop in % of students scoring 3 or higher on AP and achieving IB certification. So the idea was there was a barrier to access. We identified that barrier to access, we removed it, we put the students in, and we supported them. We also had to have some frank meetings with the teachers to make sure they understood these students were worthy of being in those rooms and they deserved to be successful just like everybody else. So there was a paradigm shift would be the nicest way to say it, but we had to make sure that those students received every opportunity. And I believe the numbers are still fairly strong there, although I don't have access to that data.
Thank you.
Yep. Ms. Jenkins, you still have 2 minutes if you'd like to ask any other questions. If you don't, we can just roll, kind of running a little bit on the...
So you mentioned one of the important things, obviously, is to recruit and retain a staff. And so I guess if you can give me an example, either in your position currently as a principal or your previous position as a superintendent, what do you think was the most effective tool to do that, and how did you accomplish it?
Yeah, it's really how you treat people. So as a school principal, it's how you treat your employees. If you treat them fairly, you value them, you show them that you care about them, that you do more than just say good morning in the morning, but you go and talk to them, you talk to them about their lives outside of the classroom and that kind of thing, and they see, okay, my boss cares about me, it's a pretty good place to work, I like working here, that kind of thing. So individual conversations, how you treat people and stuff like that, that it showed up in one of the artifacts there. We did stay surveys and exit surveys with our personnel in Indian River. And the responses in the stay surveys to how they're treated by their administrators and how they're treated by their employer or their supervisor were very strong. And that was a way that we were able to show that you treat people right, you provide the best working conditions, they're going to stay. So I think it's all about how you treat people, individually and then as a group, as a whole, is why they'll stay. The working conditions, the support, obviously money, if you can provide additional income, that's going to help, better wages and stuff like that. But again, most research that's done about why teachers leave, it's the conditions, not necessarily the pay.
Thank you, Mr. Rendell. Did anybody feel like they had a question on their list that we had already approved that did not get asked? Before I start in, I have 10 minutes, but I wanted to be cognizant of you guys. We just understand we have to ask that question again to the rest of If not, I can start in and then we can get moving. Okay, we're good? Mr. Rendell, thank you very much. I wanted to take an opportunity to, we are a unique school district in the fact that we will be preparing the backbone for space travel. And one of the things that's been since day one, has been the career and technical portion of our school district. And for 6 years, we have had amazing results with building the infrastructure, but our results as far as aircraft to aircraft techs and those in some areas are really good, but in some other areas, we have some kids that are taking construction just to be able to avoid the test at the end of the year because it gives them a different way around. What I would like to do is hear from your perspective what you've had experience in career and technical in the past and what you may be able to help us tweak in the short time that you might be here. So,
Yeah, so as a high school principal, I've always tried to make sure we had a strong CTE program on campus. For example, back at Titusville, we had automotive technology, and that program ended up being so strong we hired 2 teachers. Again, by supporting the teacher in the classroom and making sure the kids knew about the benefits of enrolling in the classes. We actually drew students from astronaut to Titusville just to take the automotive technology program. So one of it is making sure the kids understand the values of those programs, that the fact that you don't necessarily have to go to college to earn a good living. Some people, might say that they're not really interested in going to college, but what are the options? Well, make sure they know that there are viable options, that they can receive the training that they need, either at their local high school, at their neighborhood high school, or a high school that they can attend through EPO to receive the training that would provide them that career. One of the things we did in Indian River was actually open a technical college. So we secured some money from the DOE to open a technical college. Treasure Coast Technical College is in Gifford. It's right in the heart of Indian River County, right in an area where job training is needed. And so the technical college is open to high school students and adults. So the high school students can go to Vero Beach High School or Sebastian River High School for part of the day, and then go to the current technical college, VOTEC Center, some people would call it, for part of their day. The idea is that you look at your area. We do this here. CTE does this here. You look at your area, what the job needs are in your area, the high wage, high tech, high need jobs, and you try to put programs in that prepare your kids for that, to provide them that avenue. Again, like I said earlier, the best educational outcomes for students. It doesn't necessarily mean a 4-year degree from a 4-year university. It's whatever is going to put them in a position to be successful. So I think one of the things that we still probably need to do a better job is making sure people understand that's a viable option. CTE is a viable option. It's not every one of our kids needs to go to college. And I don't think that message is still out there. I think that's something that we could work on. So in the short time, if I was the interim superintendent, that might be one message. If the board, in the workshop says we really want to hammer this and get this going, we might, try to get the word out about that. Because we have really strong CTE programs at the high schools throughout the county. And it's amazing the opportunities our kids have. I don't know if the public knows about them all. I know that in previous roles, superintendent, deputy superintendent, assistant superintendent, as high school principal, I'll go to a Rotary meeting or a Chamber of Commerce meeting, and somebody will say, well, what happened to vocational education? You guys don't do vocational education anymore. And we do. They just don't know.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Rendell. I'm going to give you some time to, for your closing. You wanted to present some material and stuff like that?
Yeah, so what I do is I brought some artifacts. You might only know me as the principal at Cocoa Beach if you even know me as that. So you're interviewing me for a superintendent's position. So I wanted to share some artifacts to prove that I was successful as a superintendent in Indian River. So what I prepared for you is a couple of documents. These are primary source documents. So you have a big 3-ring binder there. I'm not going to go through the 3-ring binder the whole way, but there's a couple of documents I wanted to show you. So the first, if you see, there's a tab that says strategic plan. So if you flip to that, so that shows you a publication that we put together that shared our strategic plan with the community. So you can see that there's 5 areas there: student success, culture and climate, high quality workforce, communication engagement, and strategic partnerships. Very similar to the strategic plan that you guys have, or we have here in Brevard County. And that's a tab in the back. Actually, if you want to pull that out, you can slide that out. I didn't put it in the rings because you might have it out to the side. It shows you that the 4 areas, the 4 goal areas or objective areas of the strategic plan here in Brevard are academic excellence, exceptional workforce, community action, and operational sustainability. You guys should all know, especially the members that have been on the board, you should know about all those. So one of the things that when we engaged in the work to develop a strategic plan in Indian River was, like I said earlier, we didn't want it to be just this document on the shelf. We wanted it to be our guiding document. You know, when we make decisions, we want to say, how does that tie to the strategic plan? Obviously, the first area you're always going to focus on is academic achievement, student performance. So that whole first section is on that. And then culture and climate. It's like, how are we doing as an organization? How do our employees feel? You know, how do our customers feel? And then high quality workforce is we need to make sure we have the best teachers in the room, the best support staff, the best people working with our children. Communication and engagement. How are we doing communicating what we are doing with the community and how are we engaging them in our work? And then that last one, strategic partnerships. We had a lot of organizations in Indian River that wanted to partner with the school district. So we wanted to take advantage of those partnerships, but also go out and grow and develop more. So I wanted to show you a couple places in there. So you want to, I tabbed them all for you, so we should be able to find them pretty easy. So if you go to the second purple tab, it's in an area that says Goal 1, Student Success. You can find the second purple tab. What I wanted to show you was that each goal area has an objective, and each objective has 3 strategies and 3 measures of success. So not only did we put these goals out on a piece of paper, then we also said, okay, how do we achieve these goals? What can we do to achieve them? And then how do we measure our success? So every one of these has this format. Then if you want to skip to the executive summary, that's just a document that shows, you know, kind of how we presented the information at the end of year 1 to the community. One of the things that we did was we set up measurements, KPIs, key performance indicators for every year. It's a 5-year strategic plan. You have a goal you want to reach at the end of the 5 years, but you need to know if you're making progress at the end of each year. So we set up year 1 goals, year 2 goals, year 3 goals, and year 4 goals, and so on. And so we presented this executive summary to the community to show them at the end of year 1 how we were doing. This is only a few pages. One of the ones I wanted you to see, there's a tab there. It's an orange page, and it has some numbers, and it talks about increases in CTE, actually. So increase, 73% increase in completed industry certification in just year 1 of focusing on that as an area that we wanted to improve on. Then there's increases in dual enrollment, AP/IB courses, and enrollment in career pathways. So when we focused on trying to improve the educational opportunities and outcomes for our students, even after year 1, we had really good success. So we shared that with the community. So the next chunk of the whole thing is a report that I gave to the board and the community at the end of year 1. Kind of like a state of the schools address, but it was, how are we doing on the strategic plan? So it's actually 72 PowerPoint slides. So I don't expect you to go through them all. I highlighted a couple that I wanted you to see. So the first one, I think it's on page 2. There should be a purple tab there. In the blue box at the top, in the slide at the top says 5-year strategic plan, then it shows that 5 goal areas, 3 objectives in each goal area, 3 strategies for each goal, 3 measurables for each strategy, monitoring framework, which I did not print for you because it's like 100 pages long, had 197 data points. So to measure our success, we were checking 197 data points. The idea is what gets measured gets done. So you have to check your progress. You have to have these key performance indicators, all of these things all the time. You know, you set a 5-year strategic plan, you have a 5-year goal, but you want to be able to check your progress after the end of each year. So we did that. So this 72 PowerPoint slides checks every single objective. So the next one that I wanted you to see, I believe is on page 5. That should be your next purple tab, page 5 of the big packet there. And it talks about students receiving high quality instruction and how do we measure that? We measure it with academic achievement. If you look at that chart there, almost every column on the right, almost every number is green. That means an increase in student achievement. Even after year 1, we saw significant increases in student achievement in almost every category. The only one that dipped was 7th grade civics. and then the next year we bumped that back up. But one of the things I'm most proud of is the 14-point increase in Algebra 1. We looked at how we were teaching Algebra 1. We looked at whether we were focusing on the identified standards, because you have that. The state tells you what the identified standards are. You're focusing on them. Are you preparing the kids for success on the Algebra 1 EOC? We looked at teaching our kids how to solve word problems, because a lot of them on the EOC are word problems. So we focused on Algebra 1, and you see out there in that first year a 14% increase. The next one I wanted, and I'm showing you one in each goal area, so we're not going to go through all of them. The next one is in the goal area of culture and climate. One of the things that we did there is ask our students and our staff to grade their school. And so you can see from 2016, 17 to 17, 18, most of the grades went up. The people felt better about their school. The students felt better about their school. Staff felt better about their school. So some might say that's not a quantitative measure. It's a qualitative measure, how people feel, but it's real. You can measure it. And so that's one thing that we did was we wanted to say, okay, how do you feel about your school? And, just after the first year of concentrating on that, the increases went up. The next one's on page 21, your next purple tab. This one I talked about a little bit earlier. We made a conscious effort to make sure that we retain as many of our teachers and staff as possible. And almost every one of those data points shows an increase in retention. So we focused on making sure that our employees felt valued and they stayed. So that was good data, even just after year one. The next one, page 27. This was feedback from stay interviews. Like I said before, we did exit interviews and stay interviews. So these, we asked employees to respond to. Our first year employees were the bulk of that. And you can see the responses are all really strong. For example, 87% said their employer treats them fairly, like their boss treats them fairly, stuff like that. And the one I think that was really promising was 78% said that they plan to have a long career with Indian River County Schools. So the idea was we were working on retention and we were succeeding. The last one I want to show you is the last page, page 36. This is a huge document, 197 data points. The 5-year strategic plan had a lot of stuff in it, but it really all comes down to relationships and outcomes for kids. One of the programs we put in place was that we worked with Big Brothers Big Sisters, and we put in place a program where employees could qualify as a big brother or big sister and become a big brother or big sister to a kid in our district, be a mentor to a kid in our district. And so after just the first year, we had 30 employees volunteer and qualify to become a big brother to a student in our district. I qualified and was a big brother to a student in our district. Not working in the district anymore, I don't qualify to be his big brother anymore, but I still text and talk with him quite often. But this is something that, even though we have this huge document and everything, it still comes down to individual students and how we're impacting them. And that's why that slide is the last one I wanted to show you. Is this part of my closing too? So it's actually surfaced earlier. One of the reasons that I think I'm a really good candidate for this position is I'm already here. I already know the district. I already know the job. I've already been a superintendent. I know the challenges associated with it. I know the rules about what we can do and we can't do. And so in this time of transition, you need somebody that has already done the job and knows Florida and knows Brevard.
Thank you, Mr. Rendell. Really appreciate all the time. I'm going to give each board member about 10 seconds to just say thank you if you can. And then we have about 5 minutes that we can break to use the restroom. Mr. Trent will go in order from you because that's how we started.
Again, you're probably going to hear this. We extremely appreciate you throwing your name in this. I mean, it's a daunting job, and I know the community well where I live and how they think about you. So I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
I want to thank you also for being so well prepared. This is very insightful. I appreciate your honesty and your ideas, and yeah, I look forward to our one-on-one.
Thank you.
Stepping up to even just the interview process puts you and your family in a spotlight. Mm-hmm. And thank you for taking on the extra pressure of this process. Appreciate it.
Ms. Jenkins?
Thank you. I look forward to our one-on-one as well, and talk about the spotlight. I didn't realize that this was going to be recorded for you guys until yesterday afternoon, so I understand the pressure of that, so thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Appreciate it. We're going to break for 5 minutes. We'll come back at 10:30. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I wanted to say thank you for returning with us, and thank you, Mr. Larson, for coming and applying to be the interim superintendent at Brevard Public Schools. I appreciate your time. Looking over your resume, it's pretty impressive coming from Orange County Public Schools, which is, we've all got friends there over there on the school board, so we appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time, and the way we're going to do this today is have a 5-minute start. And if you're coming close to the end of it, I'll let it roll. It's not like it's going to stop. You'll see me stop the time, let you roll a little bit, but if you can be respectful. And then we're each going to take 10 minutes max to ask you a couple questions. The questions are going to be the same as they've been asked of the other people. And then I usually ask one and try to make up the back end of that to give you roughly about 10 minutes to respond in the end, to have closing statements and make anything that you feel like didn't get asked and you might have an opportunity. We're good on that?
Absolutely.
All right, so the beginning today, we had Mr. Trent start with the other one. What's that? Yeah. But Mr. Trent's going to be the first one to ask your, or Ms. Wright's going to be the first one to ask your questions, but you now have the opportunity to give us the 5 minutes. So it's all yours, Mr. Larson.
Just before you start, can you pull that microphone a little bit closer so the broadcast picks you up? Thank
How's
you.
that?
That's good.
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to sit in this chair today. It's not a decision that comes lightly to take on and apply for such an important role, especially in an interim position where you're in a big situation of transition. And so having an opportunity to speak to my family, and we have been actually having much conversation about next steps. January 3rd marks 30 years for me in education. And the thought was, well, what's that next chapter going to be? And why not open another chapter in an opportunity like this? And so that's why I'm here. It was never anything I wanted to do. I'm one of those that believe that it is a calling, and I was not listening. I grew up in, the 70s and 80s, where if you were a math and science student, you went to engineering, and that's where I went. And my father, after retiring from the Air Force, went into education, and I saw what he brought home every day at the dinner table, what he harbored and shouldered from the students and just the work itself. And I was like, no, not for me, not for that kind of, not for that compensation, no. Made it all the way to my senior year, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. And I walked out, went down to the guidance office and said, I need to be a school teacher, get me out. And so revamped my entire degree from a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering to a Bachelor of Science in Liberal Studies. 4 minors. My minors are in mathematics, engineering, behavioral science, and physical science. Not your typical liberal studies degree. And within a month, I was teaching at a high needs, low socioeconomic school, 8th grade, science on January 3rd, 1993. And that started, and that's what got me to build a resume that you had before. It was a calling and still is. 52 years young, got a 5-year-old at home, not looking to be done anytime soon. My oldest is 28. But you had a 5-year at home, you're pretty much invested for quite a few years. So we'll see if this opportunity comes through, and if so, what happens after that. I recognize that it's an interim, but it's an opportunity I could not pass up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. First up is going to be questions from Ms. Wright. Ms. Wright?
Well, I want to thank you for coming over, obviously, and doing this interview process. This is a bit, it is putting yourself out there. So we appreciate you being willing and eager to jump into this. And so we're going to go through a few questions, and I'll start right away. With Brevard County, I'm sure you've noticed that we've made news headlines recently. I know you're not part of our district currently, but what would you see the top 3 issues that Brevard County is facing right now? And what do you think, or how do you think your experience that you've had thus far in school systems equips you to handle those issues?
So I don't know that many of the situations and needs that you have are completely different from other districts with regard to hot topics and things of that nature. I think one of the biggest issues that we'd be facing right now is this transition and is the position of the interim superintendent and how that rolls out. And it is very easy for an interim superintendent to either make waves or actually make progress. And this is a very, very important decision that you're making today. So I think I think that would be my number one, because I think a lot of people are sitting in a tenuous position going, what's going to happen, right? January, what's going to happen? This isn't a summer where you get a chance to have the certain meetings that you can have in the summer that you might not be able to have during the school year. You're jumping in January. And so I believe that that's a very important thing that's going to come up. How do I play into that? I think I had a very eclectic job experience based on, even though it may have been entirely in Orange County, I think my opportunities have been very eclectic. I think I bring a lot to the table. Although it's been a linear title progression, there's been a lot of lateral opportunities that I can bring to the table. And that way I'm not coming in with no knowledge. I still have knowledge. Now we just have to connect it, and how is it going to work the best here in Brevard? So that's number one. Number two, I would say marketing our district, putting our best foot out there, making sure that we're putting out as many positive stories as possible, that we're showing what programs are viable and thriving, and how are we getting that word out. I think that is something that most school districts do struggle at times. You hear people sometimes say, well, our work should tell the story. No, we have to tell the story. This is a competitive situation. Schools are competitive now. We have school choice. We have to compete, thus we have to market. So we have to take the positive things, but at the same time, let's not oversee the fact that we also have to, in that marketing, accept the challenges that we have and meet them forefront and say, look, here's some challenges we have. Here's what we're doing about it, because that's just as much marketing as it is selling the good. You've got to be able to show that you're willing to take on those challenges. And so marketing is a big piece. Then I think it goes into what I would consider the third challenge, which is vacancies, teacher shortage everywhere, specifically in our exceptional education roles, not just in the instructional, but in the paraprofessional world as well. We're wearing ESC teachers out because they don't have the support in the room with them. How are we going to market our school in order to bring and attract that talent, not just here in Central Florida, but across the United States? Are you willing to move here? Because we've got the opportunities for you. And right now, it's a teacher market. Teachers can decide any school they want to go to. There's vacancies everywhere. So what are we doing, and how are we coaching up our school leadership to produce environments and climates on their campus that says, I want to come work for you. I want to come work for Brevard because I believe in the leadership, and I believe I'm going to get the support that I need once I get there. Because at the end of the day, they want to teach children. That's what they're called to do. We just need to help create that environment so we can mitigate those vacancies.
Thank you for your response there. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to ask you about a time that you've had a project or a program that you were involved in that failed, and what did you learn from that, and how did you change maybe your direction moving forward?
I've asked this question in many interviews. And I've actually had people say, I can't recall a time. And you just look at them and go, really? Really? So for myself, I would have to say it revolves around mastery learning. I'm a believer in mastery learning. And some students may not get it by Friday test day. But that doesn't mean that they don't and should not have an opportunity to still acquire that knowledge. The teacher's job is to teach. They should be rewarded for a student's excellence. And so trying to implement a mastery learning mindset at a school and just tossing it out there and assuming that everybody had the same mindset, not the best way to do that. A lot of pushback, a lot of arguments. That's not the real world. That's not how we live. It's, you either get it or you don't. It's dog eat dog, dog eat dog world. So when I repurposed that conversation, I realized that I needed to have more input, right? Especially from my union representatives, teacher leaders, because they're the ones that were going to support it or not, and having them have an input on how should that roll out and how should it look. And so when we rolled it out the second time, the why was there. We didn't have the why before, and then the first rollout. you've got to provide the why for them to have the heart. And so we did that, and we said, look, here's the situation. I mean, in all reality, look, you could take the, back in the day, FCAT, FSA, whatever it is, you could take as many times till you passed it. We take the algebra PMA as many times till you pass it, you get a concordant score. You take the SAT, ACT as many times as you need to get the score you want. Why shouldn't we do that within a certain time frame within our own classroom? If a child and a student does not have the extrinsic or intrinsic motivation to continue to learn the content, then they simply fall further behind. And as a math teacher, I can empathize with that. Sympathize, because I've been through it. If they're not willing to take the extra time to put the work in to learn that content, then that's a gap. So we've got to learn how to incentivize those students to say, look, I want to get a little bit more. And at the end, at the backside of that, it's not just struggling students. If a child gets an 88 on a test and wants that A, why don't we give them the opportunity to show that they've learned the material that they didn't get to get that A? And it went over a lot better the second time when we talked about the reasons and how we could do it. We took the burden off the teachers and placed it on after-school personnel that I paid for to provide those opportunities. So it wasn't additional work for the teachers. It was just an opportunity for students to continue their own education on their own or through tutoring or personal help to continue to strive to learn that content and move forward.
Thank you for that answer. Would you say that you were able to track success
Absolutely.
in your method there?
Absolutely. Our graduation rates went from 72% to 91% in the time I was the principal at that high school. Grade point averages went up extraordinarily, and there was a lot more. There was a lot more buy-in from students because they knew that we believed in them and that we weren't just about a test at the end of the day. It was about learning the material so that you could become a stronger student for next year and for the next year. And so there was a lot of value to it, not just a tangible grade, but the feeling that the students and teachers had about the success that students were experiencing.
Great, thank you. We're going to switch over to finance now, and I'm going to ask you, what is your vision for financial reporting and transparency and maintaining the public's trust when it comes to really being stewards of the funds that we receive from taxpayers?
So transparency is a word that gets thrown around a lot. It's a word that, as transparent as we as a board or a cabinet, we feel we're being transparent, but there's always that, no, you're hiding money, you're hiding things. So you guys, I know in your strategic plan, you were rolling out a new financial reporting and implementing it, and then I saw that in your plan. And it's not enough to just have a strategic plan meeting here in the boardroom. We could drop the screen down, we could put up the numbers, but there are a lot of numbers. And it's a lot for community members and even some of our stakeholders to understand. Our budgets are not necessarily run like private organizations, for sure. And they're definitely not run like home finances, right? The different pots of money, the categoricals that we have to really define. And we feel sometimes that we're doing it very clearly. We feel like, I thought I said it pretty clear. And then you realize that you just haven't. And so a singular presentation of where the dollars go, right? Even with ESSER funds, which I've been working with now for the last 6 months with ESSER 3, you think that you're laying it out there, but you've got to give folks an opportunity to have those questions. And going out into the community and saying, hey, you want to know a little bit more about the budget, let's sit down and have a conversation. And it's the same thing with our union members, right? I mean, reoccurring costs are reoccurring costs. And we've really got down to brass tacks about where do we have pockets, where can we save, and then just ask me the question, I'm going to give you the answer. And let's get to that point where you actually believe what I'm trying to share.
Thank you. Ms. Campbell?
Thank you. Well, welcome and good morning, Dr. Larson. Appreciate you coming to invest in this process. So how would you build and facilitate collaborative, trusting relationships with all the stakeholders among our school and district leaders, teachers, support staff, parents, students, business partners? How do we build those relationships with our community as a whole. And if you have some examples of how you've done that in your past experience, share those.
Sure. First and foremost, be present. You're not going to do it sitting in an office, putting out an email or putting out robocalls. That's not going to build those relationships. I pride myself in, and I think most people that have worked for me would tell you that I connect with people very well and very quickly. Of the 5 strengths of Strength Finders, 2 of my strengths are wooer and relator. First impressions, long-term relationships. And that's what you're going to need in this position right here, right? Because it's interim. So you got to have that woo factor. You got to be able to sit in a room and say, look, it's going to be okay. Let's talk about what's available now. Let's talk about what could be available down the road. Set up a structure and a skeleton. Because even if I'm not in this position permanently, we should still be building that structure. We should still be setting it up for the future. There was a plaque on my father's wall when he was an educator. It said, success is, and there were like 10 things on there. I only remembered one. And success is knowing that people were better because you were in their lives. That's the same thing in this position right now. Whether this position is 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, or turns into a permanent role, are you going to leave Brevard better than when you got there? Now, the only way to do that is to have that relationship with the board and myself initially. What are your priorities? What has to be done now? What can't wait? What has to be done now? What are your priorities? Number 2, excuse me. Number 2, how does that then relate to the school buildings and the districts within the school office, right? So one-on-one meetings, group meetings, you've got to get in there. What's going on in facilities? Where are we? You've got 4 capital projects that are out there right now that we've broken ground on or in process. You've got the middle school X coming in. So where are we? What do you need? What do we have to get pushed forward now? And have those conversations. And then what's going on in the classrooms? So for the last 4 years, and actually 6 of the last 10 years of district leadership, I was in schools every single day, walking classrooms, sitting in planning meetings with the teachers, with the paraprofessionals. In this role, you need to jump on a bus. You do. In this role, you need to go work the lunch line as you're visiting a school that day, right? There is no job more important than another. We're all working together for one thing, kids and their success and their outcomes. My job would be to connect those community partners, those faith organizations, businesses, the schools, all in coordination with the priorities of what the board lays out. You are the boss. You say, we do. And so it's imperative to keep those relationships and lines of communication open. Phone's never off. It's an unfortunate part of the job, but the phone's never off. So I believe that all of my roles, from even being a teacher and connecting with parents in a high-need school, to now trying to get 19 fund managers with $1 billion worth of ESSER funds all on the same page, making sure that we're monitoring it because you know the audit's coming, and making sure we're all on the same page. And that's being available. And that I think is number 1.
Thank you. I think you've already touched on this, but if there's anything you wanted to add, my second question was, what would a productive, successful interim process look like for our district? Like I said, you've touched on some of those, but if there's anything else you'd add, jump in there.
Sure. If this was a permanent position at this point, I would walk in with a 100-day plan. As it is, I put together a little 30, 60, 90. But again, it's a skeleton, right? It's what I think would need to be done. For instance, what RFPs are out there that need to be looked at? What contracts need to be renewed by the end of the year or maybe sunset, right? Those are things that have to be done. Those are non-negotiables, right? You can't let things fall through the cracks at this point just because you're interim. You're in this interim position, you're the superintendent. You're the one that's going to make the decisions, and you need to understand that. You also need to understand that in the interim role, you should be taking the time to meet with all the stakeholders, because I would consider it my duty to gather as much information from as many stakeholders as possible so that whoever does follow in this role permanently, be it myself or someone else, they got a head start. This is what the community wants. This is what the businesses are looking for. This is what your staff is looking for. And that's both administratively through classified, which I like to call support professionals. And so I see those as being huge roles. You've got to be prepared to make the decision. You've got to be prepared to say, and thank goodness our Kansas season's over, but you've got to be able to make those decisions. And you're in this role, and you've got to, your title is interim superintendent, but you can't think that way. You got to think like this is the job. You're doing the job, and you need to prepare for the 23-24 school year just as much as you need to get through testing at the end of this year, which again, brand new, right? So there's a lot of things on the table that as an interim, you just can't look at it that way.
Thank you. This one's a pretty quick one, but what is your availability?
So it's FRS. I'm ready to go. Let's do it. So as I said, January 3rd marks 30 years for me. I am available. I know that the superintendent last day is the 31st. I think the last board meeting, I heard that the expectation was January 1st, that this would be in place. The name's on the line.
Okay, thank you. And I think I've got just a few minutes left. So my last question has to do with superintendent board relationships. So describe what you believe to be the ideal working relationship with a school board, and how do you achieve that?
It's two-way communication in all forms. Phone calls, text, email, whatever we need to do to communicate. Information needs to come this way. Information needs to go that way. You need to trust that what I'm sharing with you is exactly what's happening. You've got constituents reaching out to you every day. I understand that. Having the opportunity and the availability to text me or call me and say, hey, James, what's going on with this situation? I'm hearing there's something going on here. Board relationships need to be, you're setting policy, I'm enacting policy. And as things come up throughout the school year or the day, how are we gonna deal with this together? All right. And hiding behind something or hoping something goes away is the most detrimental thing that can happen between a board and a superintendent and their cabinet. It's got to be absolutely 100% out there. And I use the word out there because I don't want to keep saying transparent. So understand that we may not agree. We may not agree on every single topic, but when we get off the phone or we finish our meeting and I walk out that door or I hang it up, I'm 100% on board. This is what we're doing. Let's go, team. It's not about what my belief is, politics or thoughts. I share those in those meetings. And once the decision is made, then you press forward and you take care of business.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Ms. Jenkins?
Good morning. I think we're still in morning. Dr. Larson, thanks for joining us in Brevard. So my first question is, were you evaluated in your previous role, and I'm gonna go off of your last position, as a chief academic officer for Orange County Public Schools? And if so, what were the results of that evaluation? Was there an area or areas identified as an opportunity for professional growth? And how did you work towards that implement?
Sure. So my last role as area superintendent reported directly to the deputy superintendent. And that evaluation, there's two pieces to our district leadership evaluation. There was the operations side, and then there's the school performance side, as we were on the teaching and learning side. So the operations side, the highest you could get is meeting expectations. I received meeting expectations, which meant that all of the compliance issues, drills, you name it, everything was completed on time and was done appropriately. So that was meeting expectations. On the academic side, I was satisfactory. The highest is above expectations. So I had 30 schools that I was overseeing. 11 of those schools were in very high need, coming off the pandemic especially, low socioeconomic areas. And so there were 11 of them. 9 of those schools improved their grades 1 to 2 letter grades, but we did have 2 schools that did drop, which accounted for that satisfactory. Both schools were 1 point from a D. Heartbreaking, and when I say 1 point, I'm talking like 0.4 of a point. It rounds up. It was heartbreaking. But that would be, so there wasn't anything that was denoted that I needed to work on. It was simply, we had 2 grades go down, satisfactory as opposed to above expectation.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm going to go a little bit off here, based off of something that you said, and I think it's really important to ask you this question. So you mentioned that you manage nearly $1 billion worth of ESSER funds over in Orange County, which is comparable to our overall budget. And so obviously that can't be simple. Obviously there has to be hiccups. So what was the biggest challenge or one challenge that you face managing such an enormous budget and team of people below it? And how did you manage that?
So I am so fortunate to work with an individual, Kim Gilbert, if you're watching, who manages most of the dollars side of that house. And when we say, if the first award was like 8 million and then 55 million and then 850 million, and then when you add in all of the additional state ESSER funds that come out, not just from the federal government, it drives up over that figure. The money's the easy part. I mean, to be quite honest, balance it, zero it out. If it's encumbered and you spend it, great. If you're over, where are we going to pick those dollars up? Where are we going to save to make sure that we're balancing out? That's actually the easy part. The difficult part that we're really, and I'm spending the majority of my time doing, is monitoring those activities that we said we were going to do. So there are over 170 activities just in ESSER 3 that we're monitoring. That could be anywhere from tutoring to Tier 1 intervention teachers that we're putting into all of our schools. How are they being utilized? And then also on top of that, the return on investment and the program evaluations that we're doing on those big dollar tickets. Because at the end of this, in 2024, right, dollars have to be spent by September 30th, 2024. There's not going to be ESSER 4. And even if there is, we have to go into it with the mindset there's not going to be ESSER 4, right? So what's sustainable? What's going to have to drop into the general fund, right? And if it's not having a return on investment, then we need to sunset that. We need to be honest about it, but we need to do that with data. Not because we don't feel like this program's working, we need to see it. So I work very closely with the Research Accountability and Grants Department on program evaluations and return on investment. And so trying to manage, what are we going to sunset 24? What are we going to continue? And all of the new amendments, where are we over already? That's what I'm working on right now. Have we overspent in the first quarter of ESSER 3? Have we underspent? There's areas where we've underspent. There's areas where we have positions, for instance, say, social workers. Now, we've allocated money to put additional social workers into school, but if we can't hire them, that money's still sitting there. So what are we going to do with those funds, and where can we shift those to bolster programs that have a better return on investment? So that's what we spend most of my time doing.
Can you please explain your experience with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what you've done in your current role or previous roles, and what you would do in this one to ensure all of our students are successful?
I hope this is your last question, because there's only 5 minutes.
You can take all the time you need. Don't worry. Don't feel pressured that there'll be another question. It's okay.
So equity is one of those words that I think a lot of folks get a little worked up about. Equality, equity, you're taking something away and giving it to someone else, and that's not the case. Equity merely means that you're taking resources and giving it to people that need the resources. You're not taking it from someone to give it to another. And I think that's where we get really worked up, when we don't have that reality and we think equal, equal, equal. But I want to put that in terms, because I am going to answer the question and I know my resume dictates quite a bit of it, but I'll highlight some of those things in my resume. If you've got a class of 25 students and you're sitting in an algebra class, algebra in high school, definitely, right? That's a lot of work there. 20 of the students do not understand AX plus B equals C, and 5 students do. Well, equality means I'm going to make those 5 students who already understand AX plus B equals C have to do the same thing over again, because these 20 students don't do it. Equity applies to those students as well. They need to be moving on to AX plus B equals CX plus D. So equity works on a range. And I think that sometimes when we hear that word, I think people get a little nervous about equity, because, oh, we're going to take something from one group and give it to another. That's not the case. When I began my work in the Minority Achievement Office in 2015, it was some of the most rewarding work that I think that I've been experienced in my role up to that point. The calculus project, we took low socioeconomic students. We took gender. We looked at why do we not have as many females in middle school algebra, and provided a system in the program to additional support after school. It was a contract. We brought the parents in, said, look, they're going to do additional work after school. They're going to get tutored after school. You're going to do this. We're going to provide folks from the community and Lockheed Martin to come in and really talk about why is algebra important. And so the calculus project was in design. It came to Boston, and it was to get more students through calculus by the time they graduated high school, because if you're only taking algebra, by the time you're in 10th grade, you're never going to get there. And in 9th grade, you're probably not going to get there. So that was kind of one of the things. I did a lot of work. I was the BPO of discipline at the time, the business process owner of discipline. And so restorative practices was brought in the year before I got there. Again, a lot of misconceptions behind restorative practices. Folks hear, oh, restorative practice, we're going to sit in a room, we're going to talk to each other, and you're not going to suspend these kids, and you're not going to discipline them. And that's a misconception behind what restorative practices really is. I would give you my philosophy on discipline. Discipline should be administered at the lowest level appropriate to the offense necessary to modify behavior, not punish, but modify behavior. And sometimes that might mean a 10-day suspension. Sometimes the lowest level appropriate is an expulsion because it's a level 4 offense. And I think that needs to be clearly stated. But what we did was we looked at the disproportionate suspension rates. And we looked at how many days students were missing school. What was the average number of days students missed if they had one suspension during the year? We looked at recidivism within different subgroups. And when I say subgroups, again, not just demographics as far as race. We looked at as gender. We looked at our ELL populations. We looked at our ESE populations. So when you say disproportionate suspension rates, at one school it could be with this group, at another school it could be other. And so data is so rich, we have it, and it shouldn't be used to hammer a teacher or a principal because of what's happening at their school. It should be used as a tool to say, hey, we're obviously not connecting with this population. What are we going to do to connect to this population? Because we're missing it. They obviously don't feel a part of the school the way we need them to. So as important as data is, it's doubly important as to how we use it and what we're doing with it. And so I've had an opportunity. We put the Minority Leader Scholars Program Award, where we were taking high school students and bringing them back to the feeder middle school as mentors to our students in the middle school and telling them, look, this is what's going to happen when you get to high school A. This is what you need to be prepared for. And we saw a lot of success in those programs and students just really taking off and taking charge of their own education. And that's the beauty of it, right? We're not taking something from someone else. We're providing the resources to the ones that need it.
Look at that.
I was keeping an eye on it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Trent?
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Larson, for coming out and putting your name on the list to be here, and congratulations on being in the finals of this position. So I'll get right to it. Some will be the same questions. Your thoughts on policy review as a potential superintendent, and have you had any experience in this process and how it would work?
Sure. So a couple different experiences in my career with policy review on two different levels. First of all, I'll say this, right? Any legislation that comes down is going to predicate the need to review our policies. And so you've got that top-down approach from state legislation that says, okay, we're going to make these changes. So we have no choice. At that point, we've got to get in there, we've got to look at the policy, and we've got to be in compliance with the regulations of the state of Florida. And that's taken care of through the cabinet and appropriate folks in the school district that work on that, in that department, say, for instance, extracurricular activities. And then the proposal is made to the board, where the board has the oversight on, no, we want to see these changes included, we want to see this change taken out. And so it's got to be a very cohesive conversation about what that policy is actually going to finally look like, because you're going to be signing it. So myself personally, while I was a Title IX coordinator for the district, and all kinds of legal. I was working with the legal committee, and I think I was involved in the revision in 2015-16 with I don't know, as many as possibly 10 board policy revisions, where We sat down, we got the information we needed to make the appropriate revisions so that we were not only in compliance, but that we were doing the best to protect the district, to protect the students and staff, because that's part of why policy is there, to keep things in check, the checks and balances. So I was able to firsthand work on revising policy myself with the legal department and others involved. And then at the cabinet level, all of those board policies come to us before they go and be presented to the board. So at that point, you're involved in any board policy review that takes place, and everybody has an opportunity sitting around the table to provide their suggestions and or concerns. But it's not outside the realm of reality where, as a superintendent, you look at the board and say, hey, can we talk about this policy? I think we need to make some revision and have that conversation just as much as it is for you as the board to say, hey, we need to take a look at this policy. And so that's also a two-way street there through the communication. And then once it's determined that a policy needs to have revision, let's make the revisions. Let's make sure legal, right? And then let's sit down and say, what else? Is there anything else that needs to be done, or are we good? And if we're good, let's sign it in, and then we follow.
Yeah, thank you very much. All right, one of the other questions would be your management style. I've heard, some of the questions, I kind of get an idea, but how would you describe your management style?
So I'm a code shifter. I remember the big, and this is not my answer. You've heard it for so many years in interviews, servant leader, and it was so overused. I'll do whatever, I won't ask anybody to do it, that I'm not willing to do. And, oh, God, it is really overused. And there are times where that is appropriate, but I consider myself more of a situational leader. There are times where you need to be, let me make sure I get this right, not authoritative or, there's the good side of it and the bad side. It's a time where you have to be, look, this is it, I've got to make the decision. All right. And then there are times where you've got to bring folks to the table and say, okay, let's have a conversation. You've got to be able to delegate. You've got to delegate to people what they want delegated to. And that's not, placating to people. They're doing what they like to do. They're going to put more effort into it, more heart. It's going to have more value. And so that's the same thing we do as we're building leaders in our school systems, right? When you're trying to build a dean to an AP and an AP to a principal, you give them roles that they're interested in so they can thrive, and then you build on what they might be lacking. So I consider myself situational. I can adapt to anything that's coming at you. And again, sometimes you've got to hit it quick. You've got no time, and you're definitive about it. And when you're wrong, you're wrong. When you're wrong, you say, you know what? I blew this one. My bad. Let's hit it from a different direction. Maybe I was a little too quick on this one. But you've got to have the humility in leadership that I think sometimes folks get this idea of, well, I'm in charge. I need to always look like I'm in charge. Well, even a duck on a pond looks calm on the top, but their feet are churning away underneath, right? As a leader, that's how you need to portray yourself. Your feet are churning, your wheels are spinning, but when you're on that water, you look as graceful as a duck on top of that pond. It's moving, but it doesn't look like you know how. And that's the same thing a leader needs to do. And I try to emulate that. You don't need to look like there's a crisis when there is a crisis, because that's when everybody all of a sudden starts to act like there's a crisis.
All right, well, thank you. So how much time do I have here?
You still have almost 4 minutes.
All right.
Over 4 minutes.
So the question was, what makes you the ideal candidate? I'm going to switch a little bit on this because of the question that we had for our last candidate and being recorded. It's out there. I'd like you to have maybe a little bit towards that. You mentioned situational leader, which I think is very important. So when you have a situation that you have a clear direction from our state, you had mentioned even that on policy. We had a situation here in the last couple of years where I believe we had a clear direction from the state and from the governor. Our last candidate kind of hinted maybe where we didn't listen to the public, and that was really on our mask situation.
Sure.
So, in the last couple minutes, how would you have liked to have seen that had played out if you were in this role? Would you have been that situational leader?
I don't think, I think at that point you'd have to, you'd make the decision. I mean, that's, you flex over into, okay, if this is the state mandate, right? I mean, let's take a look what's happened down south. You buck the system and boards get replaced, and then other things, ramifications that come in that are both financial, personal, professional. And so you have to understand your place. And I think that goes back to humility, right? My politics do not determine what I am instructed as a superintendent of a school district to do. No different than when my superintendent tells me in my role now or previous roles, this is what we're doing, then to me, that was a mandate. That came from my boss. You're my boss. State tells us what to do. The piece that really is difficult when you're in that role where you're like, look, we're going to follow the state mandate and this is what we're going to do, is how to find a way to be an empathizer to all of the stakeholders, to be able to walk that tightrope of, look, this is what we need to do. This is why. This is how we're going to try to mitigate it. This is how we're going to try to make it as painless as possible. But this is what we've been instructed to do. And that's tough because you're going to get hit. You're not 73,000 students. How many of those are, families? You're not going to make everybody happy. But you got to give them the why. And you got to work through the best ways to do it. And I think that's where the conversation sometimes, and not just necessarily in the mask mandate, but I think that's where the conversation should sometimes roll in other situations, such as, instead of saying, let's just buck the system. No, we need to do it, but let's talk about how we can work within those parameters. Is there a little wiggle room here? What can we do here? What are your ideas? Don't just share with me that you don't like it. Don't share with me, because that's not going to help. And I can't help to say, this is what we're going to do. All right, now we're at a stalemate. But the conversation needs to shift away from no, yes, to how's the best way to make this work? How can we make this? And that's through conversations. And that means sitting there getting berated at times. That's through being, lots of names being thrown your way. That's going to happen. You can't take it personal, right? It's personal for me as a parent with my children in the school system. But when I sit in that role, in whatever role I hold in the school district, that's my profession to take care of what's best for children. And at the end of the day, parents can be mad at me all they want, but if I'm making the best decision for children, I'll sleep at night.
Thank you.
Good, Mr. Trent? We're good. Is there anybody that felt like they didn't get a question asked that I could actually ask for you before I move on to my one question that I have and give him enough time to finish out? We're at 11:12 and I want to give you 10 minutes, so I'm going to give myself 2 minutes to ask you a question in response, because then that'll give you the 10 minutes, and then if anybody needs to use the restroom for 5, we can before we start the next one. So my question is that one of my big passions for the past 6 years has been career and technical education. We've spent a considerable amount of money in infrastructure building footprint of career and technical programs. One of the issues that we have is that the students that may be taking those classes may not see that as a career, but rather just an extra class to take, which is okay. And I think that there's also a need for our some of our students that may have at risk and some of those other things to see a career through those, as opposed to sometimes maybe they wouldn't be the best fit for college, but if they're not, then showing them that there's something they can succeed at also. So I want to kind of hear what your vision would be, somewhere wrapped around how a successful career and technical program would work. I know I don't expect you to understand our infrastructure and everything else, but just philosophically, like how could you take one and put it forward? Because in my mind, we're preparing to be the footprint for space.
Yes.
So with that, it's all you, man.
So I'm going to start with a personal anecdote. My 28-year-old son went to high school where I was the principal, God bless him, and sat through all of my meetings and all of our conversations about post-secondary education. And when we would sit down at home and say, okay, what do you want to do? He had 2 passions in life, music and NASCAR. That was it. Those were his passions. Anything else was non-important. And so he's like, well, I'm going to go to Florida State for music. And I said, all right, we'll get you on the path, and we'll start looking at Florida State for music. I came home from work one day, and he's sitting on the couch, and he's like, Dad, we need to talk. And I'm like, well, no, let's not have that conversation. He says, I'd like to go check out a school tomorrow. And I said, all right. What school? And he goes, Universal Technical Institute. I said, oh, yeah, over there off Taft Island Road. He says, yeah. He goes, I want to check out the automotive school. I'm like, all right. So I said, yeah, there's no school tomorrow. So, yeah, we'll go. You know, I'll take you. He goes, no, we have an appointment at 3 o'clock. I'm like, who are you? We got there at 3 o'clock. At 6 o'clock, I signed a contract to send him to North Carolina for the NASCAR Technical Institute. Yeah, I was so impressed with the program. And he graduated from UTI, and he is now working in Kentucky for Volkswagen. And on the way home from that check, I looked at him and said, dude, why did we just have this conversation today? He goes, Dad, you're a high school principal. I'm supposed to go to university. I said, you sat in my meetings with juniors and seniors, and I've always talked about CTE, military, university, workforce. What do you think? He goes, high school principal. I thought I had to do it. I'm like, well, I obviously didn't market it to my son. I sure need to do a better job marketing it to everybody else. I think that was part of the problem, right? 1970s grease shop is not automotive, right? And so in where we've been, one of my mentors was the associate superintendent over CTE in Orange. He's one of my current mentors. And he said it best. He says, why are we pushing kids into AP or CTE? Why can't you have steak and lobster? And why are we only marketing it to this group of students versus this group of students? And that's what it comes down to, right? It's the marketing. It's the viability, not just of the program, but the future. A TIG welder can come out right now and make 70,000 plus to start. That's such a trade, that's such a skill, an art is what I would call it. How are we not communicating with business to build these programs? Over in Orange, they turned it into Orange Technical College with 5 campuses as opposed to these 5 remote sites that were all separate. And unfortunately, when I became principal, I know I'm out of time, but when I became principal, most of the programs that we had an automotive program at the high school, but it was then sent to the site. And then it all got pushed out to the site. And so now we've lost that connectivity necessary sometimes in those schools. It is crucial for our society to build those programs and to not treat them mutually exclusively. And it goes back to one of the 3 challenges in a school district, marketing. What are we doing to sell this as a product and not just as a, here's something else, here's something cool you can do. So that would be my thought.
Thanks for that passionate speech. I didn't know that you would get into a relationship with your son, so thank you for taking that time. That's good. I'm going to give you 8 minutes because I was going to give you 10,
Sure.
but we kind of rolled over, and I have to be respectful of the other individuals being able to use the restroom. I get myself in trouble because I forget sometimes and we roll.
Completely
So
understand.
I'll give you the 8 minutes, and this is your floor to tell us anything that you may not have been able to, and we appreciate it. So here you go.
So I shared that my father went into education after the Air Force, and I'm going to hold on right now. So when he passed in 1997, at the young age of 50, he never got to see me progress through my career. I've been a teacher for 4 years. I have worked my entire career to honor his name. I'm not here today about a legacy. I'm here because I was drawn to say, can I make Brevard a little bit better, even if it's only in 4 months, than when I got there? Because I do feel like I've been able to do that throughout my career in all of the assignments that I've been given. I believe that if you were to do any research on me, the value of relationships, how you treat people, why they keep coming back, and why they'll run through a wall for you, even if they don't understand or don't agree, but they believe in you that much, that you're their recognized leader. We do panorama surveys, garner support, and thoughts about support. My learning community office was 95% favorable rate. That's with all administrators, APs, principals. But they'll tell you, my title doesn't matter. The job matters. Children matter. The title just gives me some latitude on how much I get to do to get there. But I'll lay on the floor and talk to a child in trauma. I'll sit in a classroom and do a one-on-one with a child. I will sit with a teacher who's ready to quit. And a principal, well, numerous principals over the last 2 years that were ready to quit and say, we're going to make it through. How you treat people is how you'll be remembered. And that's something my father instilled in me. That's why I'm here. Can I bring a relationship base that can bring stakeholders together after the last 2 years of high contention? And I think that I've got that skill set to maybe heal some wounds. Scars are never going to go away, but maybe heal some wounds, build some trust in district leadership, school board leadership, with the folks that are out there that are doing the job. I believe that's what makes me the best candidate for this job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. I'm going to give each one of them an opportunity to say a couple of words real quick. Mr. Trent?
Well, Mr. Larson, I just again want to thank you very much for coming out, laying all on the line. You're an impressive human being, so I appreciate it, and I wish you all the best here. Thank you.
Ms. Wright?
I want to thank you as well for coming and putting your name in the contest here. That's a step of bravery, it is. I look forward to our one-on-one this afternoon, so we'll get to know you a little better. Thank you.
Ms. Campbell?
Yeah, thank you. And it always brings an extra spotlight, especially since we have you lined up like we're the Inquisition and live stream, and if nothing like a little pressure. We very much appreciate your time and your candid responses.
Ms. Jenkins?
Yeah, thank you again for taking the drive over here and joining us today. I appreciate it very much. And I appreciate your responses, not only about your professionalism, but as well as your personal. So thank you for being open and honest, and I look forward to our one-on-one.
Mr. Larson, I know you got a couple of FSU fans up here, so thank you for telling that story.
I do have one that went to Florida too. I just got to say, right?
Just
There's your
FSU music.
equality right there.
And I did want to say, you have a very impressive resume, and I appreciate the time for you coming here before us and taking the time to answer some of these questions.
I'm excited.
I'm looking forward as they are, so let's get moving. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you.